At this stage now, so we've completed our pocket bag with seam allowance. We also have our front and back contour waistband, as well as our back pant and the front pant pattern pieces. The next thing that you want to determine is, if you're just working on a dress form and you can pin this to the dress form, realistically, you can just sew half of the body, pin it onto the dress form, check, make sure you love the fit, and then eventually move on to final fabric. But if you're working with a live client, you're going to want to make a full pair of pants with the pockets and waistbands to go all the way around their body so they can put these on, move around in them, sit down, stand up, etc. So what we need to do then is we need to start writing down how many pieces of muslin to cut per pattern piece. Now, if you're following along with me, what I'm going to do is a mock-up that goes all the way around her full body. So for the front main pattern piece, I need to cut 2. And then again, the same thing here for the back. Let's take a look here at the front pattern piece. As well as on the contour waistband, we'll look at the front waistband. For this waistband, after you cut this shape out in muslin, it might get really confusing where's the front and where's the side seam. So here at center front, we need to have a notch. So coming along center front, we're going to put a notch going into the seam allowance. Also, for the beginners, sewing for this long curve, sometimes they'll get a little bit lost. So it's nice to have a notch somewhere inside of here. What we can do here is we'll line up the center front of the waistband along the waist, and you can walk it over here to the grain line from your pants. And we'll put a notch here on the curve of the waistband. So this is our notch on the contour waistband. And then we also want to have the notch here in the waist, on the waist of the pant pattern. Now for my pants, I'm going to cut 2 pairs of pants for the left and the right side. The contour waistband, we need it to be 2 layers thick on each side. So for the front contour waistband, we need to cut 4. For the back pattern piece, we're going to cut 2, so we have the left and the right pants. The waistband is on a fold, so what we need for this cut on a fold is cut 2 on fold. Now for the side seam pocket, you're going to need 1 pocket bag for the front and 1 pocket bag for the back. And that would be the right side. And then you need to do the same thing again on the left side. So the pocket bag is going to be cut 4. And keep in mind, if you're doing a half body muslin mock-up, then you only need to cut out half as many pattern pieces as I was just talking about. At this stage now, we're ready to cut all this out in muslin. What I'm going to do is I'm going to block out a piece of muslin for each of the fronts and the backs. And then I'll block out another piece of muslin to get 4 of the pockets and another piece of muslin to get all of the contour waistbands. If you don't know how to block your muslin out, then go back and watch the video on how to do that. Because for this video, I'm just going to move through really quick. Alright, so let's get started on prepping our muslin and cutting these out. For our front and back, we want to cut 2 fronts, 2 backs. We want to figure out how large of a piece to block out. Basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to block out 1 piece of muslin big enough for 1 pattern piece, so I need 4 pieces of muslin. Both of these pattern pieces in general are about the same size. I know that the back is slightly bigger than the front. So if I take the back measurement, here I have 14, and I'm going to go ahead and add 5 or 6 more to that. So that will give me 20 wide. And then if I look at about how tall this is, it's 20, so I want to add 5 more to that, so I'll do 25. So for these 2 pieces, I've cut out 20 wide by 25 in the length grain. Here's 2 from my front, 2 from my back. And then I've already gone through the process of blocking these out so they're perfect and ready to be cut. Alright, so we're taking a look here at the pocket bag. We need 2 for each side of the pants, which makes a total of 4. If I look at the pocket bag here, the width, the widest point on mine is 8. So if I add 4 more to that, I'll have 12 into the width. And then for the length grain, if I stack this twice, so if I were to cut a piece out big enough to have 1 pocket on top and 1 on the bottom, then I would take this measurement and double it. So pretty much 11 doubled is 22, and add a couple more would be 24. So now I've already blocked my pieces, and I can cut 2 pockets here at the bottom and then 2 more up here at the top. So the last 2 things we need to do is we need 2 of the back contour waistband cut on a fold, and then we need 4 of the front waistbands. Something that you could do is you could prep a piece to cut out 2 of these on the fold, have that separate, and prep out another piece of muslin to cut these out for 4 layers. Also, if you want, you can combine the 2 and just cut all of them on 1 piece of muslin. Let me show you how to do that right now. So between the 2, we need to figure out which one is the widest. So that will be the front. So for the front, I'm measuring right around 10.5 or 11. And then I'm going to give myself some room, so that would be 13. Now remember, for this one, we need it to be on the fold. So we're going to have 13, and then we're going to double that to 26. So now we have the fold. Then if you were to look at this pattern piece, stack it twice, take this one, stack it twice, and then measure how much you need there. And I'm seeing that I would need about 22 to get these all the way up. So here I've already prepped a piece of muslin. I've already blocked it out. It's 26 wide by 22 length grain. I'm folding it in half along the length grain. So now I can line up the back contour waistband on the fold, and it's going with the length grain. I can cut 2 of these out right there. And then for my front waistband, it doesn't need to be on the fold, so I'll just cut 2 all the way through, and then another 2 up here, and I'll have 4 of these, all on 1 piece of fabric. And keep in mind, if you're doing a half body muslin mock-up, then you only need to cut out half as many pattern pieces as I was just talking about. For those of you who are not sure about the top of your waistband, if it's going to be high enough, then at this point make sure you're adding 1 inch of seam allowance at the top of the waistband, so you can do a fitting with your client and then decide exactly where you want the top of her pants. When you're cutting out the front contour waistband, this pattern piece is just kind of floating in the middle of the fabric, and you need to know how to position it. The center front is with the length grain. So after you have blocked your muslin, put your pieces together where they're stacked, you'll want to make sure that your raw edges are totally parallel, and you want to know where the length grain is. So this is my length grain. So I can come over here with center front, and I need to have center front staying parallel with the length grain as I slide this over into the middle of the fabric. Something you could do is you can line up the edge of your ruler with the edge of your length grain, and then position your pattern piece so now it is perfectly placed here on grain. Something else you can do is, if you notice the pattern is in the middle of the fabric, and about right here is my grain line in the pattern piece, I can also do a pin pull and I can draw my grain line, and then I can position my pattern piece here and then I can make sure that it is totally on grain with the grain of the fabric. And using this technique is especially helpful if the raw edge of the fabric is really far away. For those of you who are doing 1-inch seam allowance at the top of her pants, be sure to also do that on your front contour waistband. So you can see now I cut out 2 backs on the fold, and then I was able to cut out 4 fronts here in the middle. It's a little bit wasteful right here on the backs because I used the larger measurement for the fronts, but in the end, if you were to block out 2 separate pieces of muslin, you still kind of waste around the same amount of fabric. For the back waistband, make sure you get your notches that line up with your back darts. And then here at center back, we don't have a notch because it's on the fold, but you're going to want to know where that is. So what you do is you cut half of a triangle, and then when you unfold this, now you'll have your notch for the back. Now for the front pattern piece, we have the notch here, which lines up with the grain on your pants. And then of course, don't forget we need a notch here at center front. Now for the pockets, the grain direction is going with the length grain. Since we're cutting this out in muslin, it doesn't really matter if you're cutting this with the length grain right side up or upside down, just as long as you stay on grain. What I'm going to do is, I've already blocked out both layers of the muslin, and I have them here stacked perfect right on top of each other. Really what I could do is, I can just fold this in half and making sure all of the edges are totally parallel with each other, so this is all on grain, and I can just cut all 4 layers in one shot. Now what we want to do is, again, we want to make sure that the length grain here is parallel to the raw edge. So you could bring in your ruler and double check here with the length grain. Or something that I like to do is I'll come up here, I'll put a pin pull in the middle of the muslin, and I'll line up my pattern piece perfect on grain. And you can do 1 pin right here at the grain, and you can still pivot your pattern piece to make sure it's lined up down below. And then once you've pinned it in place and cut this out, hold on for a second and I'm going to tell you how to notch this. Now before you notch the side seam of your pocket, I need to warn you first that this absolutely has to be smaller than 1/4 of an inch. What I'm showing you here is later on we're going to sew these together at 1/4 of an inch, and I'm drawing a line so I can see exactly where I'm going to sew. And as you'll notice, the notch is smaller than that 1/4 of an inch seam. So it's really important to make sure you know this right now. As another option, when you're working on these notches, if you want, you could cut the notch going outwards. This is similar to what they do on like a store-bought pattern. And this helps also just as a reminder to yourself to never cut this notch going inwards too far. Now that you understand this, let's go ahead and clip this notch less than 1/4 of an inch. And this is going to line up with the side seam on your pants. For the pocket, this is a really long curve, and I know for beginners, sometimes they get nervous not having some notches in here. Ultimately, these pockets only sew to themselves, so you can put the notch wherever you want. And if you want, you could do one notch somewhere in the middle area, or you could do a notch up high and a notch down low. For the front and back, I've blocked out 4 muslins. At this point, we want to separate it out. So we have 2 for the back and 2 for the front. Now before we cut through both layers, we need to make sure that the grains are perfectly lined up as well as the horizontal balance line. So we need to go and do that on each individual piece of muslin, the same that we did when we were cutting the pants to develop our pant sloper. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is we want to find a position for the grain line. We'll do a pin pull. We'll mark this. Then you can line up your pattern piece to find an ideal location for the horizontal balance line onto your muslin. And then again, we'll do a pin pull and mark it. And then we'll do the same thing to our other piece of muslin. When you come over to do this for the second piece of muslin, be sure that you're using your pattern piece upside down, especially when we get into the back where the shaping is different on both sides and your horizontal balance line and your grain line will move around a little bit. Go ahead and start this process now for both of your front pieces on the muslin. And then what we're going to do is we're going to pin these together and cut them out together. So wait for me on that part. Now once you have this one completed, we want to keep track of which one that was. So let's go ahead and flip this over. And then bring in this piece here on top. So now you can see the markings on this one and the markings on that one. And this is going to match for the front of the pattern piece. And this is going to match for the back of the pattern piece. When you're ready to line up this cross mark here from the front and the back, what we'll do is we'll take a pin and we'll put it through the cross mark on the back, and then you can line up this pin going through to the front. So then you pull the pin all the way through both layers and you start moving the muslin around until that pin is poking straight up and down, and you know that those two corners are perfect, stacked right on top of each other. And then I want to come up here and make sure my grains are matching at the tops. And then all the way down here at the bottom. Just as a reminder, the pin here in the middle should always remain facing totally straight up. You'll also notice I use my fingernails to move the fabric around without stretching the fabric. And then out here at each of the horizontal balance lines. And if you've done it correctly, there should not be any bubbles anywhere. All of these lined up perfectly, and this pin here is still poking straight up and down. Go ahead and double check yours now, and keep in mind it takes a couple times to get it so everything's just right. If you're not able to achieve this, then possibly your muslins are still not quite perfect on block. Now I'm ready to come in here and line this up to start cutting out my front pattern piece. At this stage, you can go ahead and cut out your front and back pant pieces, but do not cut out any of your notches yet. I need to talk about clipping notches because I need to really emphasize that this side seam notch can't go any deeper than 1/4 of an inch. Alright, so let's cut our notches here on our front pattern piece. Over here at the side seam in the horizontal balance line, you want to clip a notch that is smaller than 1/4 of an inch. Up here at the grain line, same thing, we need a notch as well as center front. And both of these should be smaller than 1/4 of an inch. If you remember on the sloper, we have a square right here. And that square represents where the zipper stops and sewing the crotch seam starts. And we put a drill hole. We need to have that same location here on this pattern piece. So this is a square, and it's a drill hole going through all layers. For me, I just have these cut here at the knee because I'm just testing everything we're doing in the waist area. But if you're doing full-length pants, make sure you get your double notches from the inseam down here at the knee level as well as your single notch here at the side seam. When we come over to the back, we have a notch here at the side seam, a double notch here at the back crotch seam, and for me, now that we're getting a little more advanced, for the dart legs, really I just put a single notch flowing the same direction as the dart leg. And then of course we need the drill holes for the dart tips. Okay, let's just double check everything one last time. So for the front and back, we have notches here at the side seams, and it's going to match your notch from your pockets. And then on my pockets for the beginners, I put a couple more notches on here so you don't get lost going around the curve. For the back, we have a double notch here in the back crotch. At the front, we have the drill hole going through where the zipper stops. Up on the waistline, for the front, we have a notch at center front and another notch here at the grain line for both the bottom as well as the waistband. And then on the back, we have a notch where both of these darts are going to close. I have my slits for my darts as well as my dart tips. And then the center back of these waistbands has a little notch there, and it will eventually meet up with this center back after we sew the backs together. Alright, let's get started. What we're going to do is I'm going to show you how to sew both a half body mock-up and also check the waistband. And I'm going to also show you how to sew the complete full body mock-up so you can put this back onto a client or test it on yourself.